in webinar number 148, since the Andean Health Organization Hipólito Unanue Agreement started the cycle of webinars in 2020. On December 18, the Andean Health Organization will celebrate 51 years of uninterrupted work of joint and coordinated actions with the ministries of health of the 6 countries, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela, with the vision of advancing in guaranteeing the right to health of the population. To begin with, we will give 3 key messages. First, contribute to decrease vaccination gaps, especially with the alarming situation on the re-emergence of polio in the world. We need to reinforce immunization campaigns so the population can complete their vaccination schedule. Second, the climate crisis threatens life, health, and well-being. Like any crisis, it is an opportunity for improvement. You can contribute to generate social policies in a sustainable development model. Join an initiative in defense of the environmental and water. Buy local products and plant-based foods. Use public transportation, cycling, walking. Reduce consumption by reusing, repairing, and recycling. Restore relationship with nature. It is essential to recognize the ancestral knowledge of native peoples who have lived in balance with Mother Earth and practice good living. Third, the multiple and complex crises facing humanity constitute urgent challenges for the continuity of life on the planet. Among other consequences, the socioeconomic and environmental context in Latin America and the Caribbean configures a scenario in which hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition have increased. This is a priority issue that requires political decisions to transform current agri-food systems so that they are sustainable, sufficient, inclusive, efficient, and generate equality so that all people can have access to a healthy diet. Reflections on these and other topics of great relevance to health and well-being can be found in the monthly edition of the Noti Salud Andina newsletter, available in the Andean Health Organization's webpage. We invite you to leave your name, organization, and country in the comment box of the Facebook Live or YouTube Live chat. In the same space, you can leave your questions or send them via email to webinarsorsconu@gmail.com. In this webinar, we will continue the usual dynamics. We will start with institutional greeting, followed by the presentation of our speakers, and then to the Q&A session. To access the certificate of attendance, as usual, in any of the chats of Facebook Live or YouTube Live, you will find a fixed link. You must fill out a brief survey and then leave your data for the issuance of the certificate. It will be sent in the coming days to your emails. To start this important day, I give the floor to Dr. Maria Carmen Calle, Executive Secretary of the Andean Health Organization, who will give the welcome and institutional greeting. Go ahead, Dr. Calle. Thank you very much, Bertitas. Well, the Andean Health Organization Hipólito Unanue Agreement was established by decision of the Ministers of Health of Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela in December 1971. On December 18, we will celebrate 51 years of uninterrupted work with the vision of making significant progress in the effective exercise of the right to health for the population. Since May 2020, we have been holding webinars every week with the objective of promoting continuous interlearning. I cordially welcome you to webinar number 148, Water Unites Us. In November of 1992, the Pan American Health Organization, the Inter-American Association of Sanitary and Environmental Engineering, and the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association signed a declaration in Havana and created the Inter-American Water Day. This celebration aims to recall the relevance of this essential liquid and raise awareness about the need to seek measures to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 6, water and sanitation for all by 2030. Despite the fact that all social and economic activities and the health and well-being of people depend to a large extent on the supply of fresh water and its quality, 2 billion people live without access to safe drinking water. The COVID-19 pandemic made it clear that safely managed drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene services are vital to human health. The frequent hand washing is essential to contain COVID-19 and prevent other infectious diseases. However, 1 in 4 people still lack access to hand washing facilities with soap and water in their homes. Universal access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene are fundamental to global health. Water is essential for many other aspects of sustainable development. According to the United Nations 2020 Sustainable Development Goals report, achieving universal water coverage requires a quadrupling of current rates of progress. Achieving the targets of SDG number 6 will save 829,000 lives per year. Currently, this is the number of people who die each year from diseases directly attributable to unsafe water and inadequate sanitation. In order to ensure universal access to safe and affordable drinking water for all people by 2030, it is necessary to make adequate investments in infrastructure, provide sanitation facilities, strengthen intersectoral work, governance, research, information for decision-making, and watershed-based territorial planning. It is also essential to incorporate ancestral knowledge, encourage community participation, systematize and recognize the significant experiences developed in the region. In this sense, today, with luxury speakers, we will reflect on the importance of water to promote health and preserve life, and we will analyze the progress and challenges of Sustainable Development Goal number 6. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water for all people. Welcome Marina Gil, welcome Eduardo Ortiz and Alberto Lora. Welcome to all the people who are with us. Thank you, dear Dr. Calle. After the greeting of our Executive Secretary, introduce myself. My name is Bertaluz Pineda Restrepo, Coordinator of Climate Change and Social Inequalities in Health in the Andean Health Organization, and today I will gladly be in charge of moderating this webinar. After this preamble, we extend a warm welcome to Dr. Marina Gil Sevilla. Marina is a water resources specialist in the Water and Energy Unit of the ECLAC's Natural Resource Division. She holds a PhD in Natural Resource Economics and has more than 12 years of experience both in Latin America and Europe in issues related to natural resource economics, water, climate change, and environment. She has worked on research projects for water and climate change policy development and taught natural resource economics and experimental economics at several universities in Chile. Since 2016, she supports more than 10 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean with technical assistance and capacity building. Dear Marina, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. The space is yours. Thank you very much, Berta. Thank you all for the invitation. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know if everything is okay. Thank you. So, good morning. I will share my presentation. We'll first talk about the region in terms of hydric resources, then the progress made in SDG 6, together with the proposal that we have at ECLAC for a sustainable and inclusive transition in the region, and then move on to the activity and actions that promoted by ECLAC to achieve this SDG 6 throughout the region. Well, according to the opening words of Dr. Calle, we're focused on regional data, we can see that we have made some significant progress in terms of access to water, safe water drinking and sanitation in recent years. But it is true that there's still a large gap to achieve a safe management for these services, and safe management implies access to quality water with no damage to the health and the environment. And in a continuous fashion, in that regard, in this region, we have 1 out of 4 people don't have access to safe drinking water. This is 161 million people in the entire region. And what is of more concerning, 7 out of 10 don't have access to safely managed sanitation. This implies 431 million people. On the other hand, it was mentioned, almost 24 million people don't have access to hygienic hand washing facilities. In addition, we see that quintile 1, the most vulnerable in terms of income, has a 25% less access to safely managed drinking water. And in addition, it can pay up to 2 times more the richest quintile compared to with their income, of course. So we see that in the Latin America and the Caribbean, many people are lagging in terms of drinking water and sanitation, especially in the rural areas, as we can see in the lower right corner of the slide. If we look at the availability of water in the region, it is quite abundant. We have 28,000 cubic meters per inhabitant, which for a average that's 4 times higher than the world average. We see in the map that there's the measure the availability of water, 3.5%, below 3.5%. But the truth is that water is distributed with inequality. And if we see the right side with the map, in terms of hydrographic basins, there are more situations of hydric stress, which is high or extremely high, especially in the most important cities of the regions and the strategic, in some strategic areas. Here we see that water can decrease, and those low values are similar to the ones seen in the north of Africa. So this is the current situation. These limitation of water resources has been affected by the climate change, and we have different impacts. For example, in recent decades, there was an increase in contamination of water bodies in Latin America. There's a loss of aquatic ecosystems. 7,000 square kilometers of freshwater surface have disappeared in South America, and this is equivalent to 4 times the size of the city of Sao Paulo, or we've lost glaciers equivalent to the territory of Guatemala, and the conflicts initiated have quadrupled due to water availability. If we look in general terms, the progress made throughout the region in terms of the SDG 6 for clean water and sanitation, and we see some examples of their goals at the regional level, we still have some challenges. We can see only 75% of people have access to drinking water as safely managed, and 34% no sanitation services. Less than 40% of residual water is being treated. In those countries where we have data, that is also important, we have a low efficiency in the use of water of $12 US dollar per cubic meter, and there's a challenge in the implementation of the comprehensive management of hydric resources, because it doesn't reach 45% of implementation in the region. And in global terms, from the entire surface of the region, we evidence a loss of ecosystems. If we see the progress of SDGs in the region, we have this slide that was presented through the last Sustainable Development Forum in Costa Rica for our region. We have in green the goals that have been reached or very likely to be reached with the current trend. In yellow, the goals that have the correct trend, but the progress is still very slow to achieve it on 2030. And in red, those goals that are getting away from the expected value. And here we have to indicate the case of SDG 6, where we don't have any one in green. And for those that we have data, the progress is quite slow or insufficient. Another estimations that were mentioned with Dr. Calle, that are specific for the region, indicate that we need to increase 14-fold the efforts of current investment if we want to achieve the SDG in 2030. So facing this situation, in this context, the ECLAC proposes to change the situation and the inertia that's present with a sustainable and inclusive water transition, and this is supported on 4 pillars. First one is to guarantee the human right to water and sanitation, managed securely, and this will be achieved through promotion of investment without leaving nobody behind. The second pillar is to promote the regulatory changes that will promote the equal access and available and eradication of poverty. The third pillar was to reverse the externalities refusals that are associated with pollution, overexploitation, and what conflict due to water. And this is triggered by the lack of regulation and control. And finally, the fourth pillar that we promote is to go transforming linear water management into circular management to boost this resource. I would also like to share that ECLAC from the Natural Resource Division is promoting a number of regional activities that are prepared for the UN conference on March of 2023 in New York, and has the major goal to see the progress of SDG 6. Some of the activities that we are promoting, we have created a expert regional group made up of more than 20 representatives from prestigious institutions who work in water topics, and the group has the goal to share the efforts being carried out, find the synergies, and to promote the strengthening of capacity of the countries in the region in common topics. These are shared on a quarterly basis on our webpage. Another of the activities that we are promoting from ECLAC is the meeting called Dialogues of Water. It's a high-level meeting celebrated in recent years with the participation of more than 3,000 people from the region. This year will be carried out in hybrid format in Santiago de Chile between 18 and 20 January 2023. You can register for this online version, and in this meeting, we would like to collect the efforts of the region and the progress that are being carried out by the countries to take the messages to New York. Another of the initiatives that ECLAC is promoting is to develop open consultation for the identification of water priorities in the region. The topics that are of concern people in the region, because in these discussions, not the government are not only ones who have participated, but also the publics, the NGOs, the private sector, and civil society, and universities. There's been a consultation for Latin America and another one for the Caribbean. This is the example for Latin America, where we can see that the most important topic that was collected by the survey is the access to water, drinking water and sanitation. Number two, in terms of governance and institutionality of the managing of water resources. So these activities, we have several outputs. On one hand, we're going to be the input for the World Report that we presented in the 2023 Water Conference. It will include regional perspectives that are collected from the regional commissions from the United Nations. We have also prepared a report for the Secretary General that was presented in the 77th period of sessions of the General UN Assembly, where they evaluated the progress in the implementation of the first half of the decade for water. It's dedicated from 2018 to 2022, and ECLAC will participate in 2 parallel events in the water conference, where the countries in the region will have a space to share their experiences. All these actions that ECLAC is promoting for accelerating SDG 6 in the region have as a starting point the global framework of SDG 6 that has 5 cross pillars. Number 1 is data and information, financing, capacity building, innovation, and governance. I will just give you some brief comment on these pillars and how ECLAC is working in trying to accelerate the compliance of SDG 6. With regards to financing, we have estimation from ECLAC for the countries in the region that indicate that invest 1.3% of the regional GDP annually for 10 years could universalize access and create and we will recurrent this human right, and we also generate other benefits, such as, for example, 3.6 million jobs annually that could be created to contribute in public health, have benefits as they mentioned in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, but other diseases associated to drinking water and sanitation. I don't know if I received an alarm. My time is up. No, you're doing great. Go ahead. I'm trying to speak as slowly as possible. So as I was saying, it is very important the investment to close the gap that will contribute for public health benefits. There's also an estimation that indicates that the 5.7 DALIs, 5.7 million years that are valued in $1.8 billion due to diseases associated of the lack of access to sanitation and drinking water of good quality. Another estimation of investment is that an 1% increase in drinking water and sanitation coverage improves the gender parity index in school attendance by 18%. And finally, another evidence of how investment will generate benefits is that we have calculated that investing in circular wastewater treatment systems and recovering methane for energy generation and self-consumption has a cost-benefit ratio, may reduce up to 40% in the operation cost and reduce the methane emissions in 86%. So here we have a number of evidences that help us to continue promoting investment going towards SDG 6. The second generator is data and information. And this has to do to have specific evidence for decision making and the elaboration of public policies. In this regard, from the ECLAC, we acknowledge that in order to achieve a water transition, the countries in the region, they still require timely, reliable, and standardized information that is still disaggregated and has different in between countries. We also need gradual changes that will allow us to measure and generate disaggregated data to focus on the most vulnerable groups. And also, another of the most important information is to have spaces where we can share information and data where the indicators are available for decision making. In ECLAC, we currently are trying to strengthen these pillars, and our contribution to the chapter for regional perspective of water resources, where we have emphasized the need to improve monitoring and generate information, in this case, regarding underground waters. In terms of the next pillar, the capacity building, I will briefly mention the technical assistance and technical training in several topics, social rates, and the most important thing is that at present we have 2 projects with strength for capacity building in this region. One of them has to do with water and sanitation with renewable energy for Central American countries, and the other one is about to start for all the countries in the region, and is focused to strengthening capacity for development of policies, plans, and projects based on evidence, and it will be through a network and observatory for water sustainability that will have a space to share experiences as well as a regional network. In terms of the acceleration of SDG, well, we are looking to propose new practices and technologies that improve water management. In the slide, we can see that as opposed to the other countries, an uncoupling between water extraction, but they decrease the water extraction. In our region, we have the opposite. We have recorded a coupling between water extraction in the last 2 decades. So we from the ECLAC are trying to promote the adoption of principle of circular economy to reduce the resource in the region. And finally, the last accelerator is the governance. In order to achieve water transition that we're proposing, we start by reforming the current governance systems, and this implies to strengthen the institutions and define clear roles, consider comprehensive solutions, given that water is transversal and is in many sectors and in many institutions. We need to provide these cross-sectional approaches and also to improve the coordination and cooperation among the different stakeholders, and this will include watershed institutions, sectoral and community users, and also the governments. This is still a challenge because in this region, there is only 43% of implementation of the comprehensive water management. In addition, we wanted to mention that from ECLAC, we're going to publish a study that analyzes a topic that's frequently ignored in our region, which is the integration between gender and water policies and the relevance that this has in terms of governance of water. The central message or the core message that will be published the coming month, I believe, is the investment in water sector has an enormous effect in reaching gender equality in our region, because with having an access that's stable and of quality, not only liberate the time of women and children, but also their participation in education and decision making and earning money. To conclude, and just briefly to highlight some messages, I want to share that indeed we need to accelerate the implementation of SDG 6 to comply with the objective on 2030. We know that there is major progress, but still a long way to go. In this regard, the ECLAC is promoting a regional process for the Water Conference in 2023 through activities such as water dialogues, regional expert group, and open consultation, to which you are invited to participate. With this, thank you very much. Thank you, dear Marina. Excellent presentation. You've emphasized that in relation with SDG 6, Water for Everyone, we have made important progress in this region, but there's still some issues that persist, like the large number who still live without drinking water and with limited sanitation. You also mentioned that water is distributed in an inequality. The region is affected by the climate change effects. She presented the progress status of the implementation of that SDG in the region, the activities carried out of the 4 pillars, the right to water and sanitation, to have equal access and to reverse this negative, to promote innovative policies. You also conclude your presentation with a reflection on all the opportunities that we have to accelerate and be able to reach the goals of SDG. You show the opportunities, several pillars that ECLAC works, and we will be very alert, expecting the publication of that interesting book that establishes the relationship between gender and water. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. We ask you to continue in the room. We've had many comments and also questions. After the presentation, we will go to the Q&A session. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Eduardo Ortiz has the floor. Eduardo is an environmental health and international health regulation development advisor at the Pan American Health Organization. Some of his contributions have been declaration of El Salvador as one of the first countries in the region not to request an extension for the implementation of the international health regulations. The intersectoral and interagency construction of instruments for environmental and health regulations, such as the National Drinking Water and Rural Sanitation Regulations. Extension and consolidation of water safety plans. Development of health emergency response projects. Support in the consolidation of the Safe Hospital Strategy, coordinated emergency respect projects, especially due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in support of the hospital network and the health services network. During 2021, we worked in the implementation of the ETA and IOTA Hurricane Emergency Project. In the environmental area, contributed to the installation of the Toxicology Information Center based at the National Autonomous University of Honduras, and the development of health evidence with public policy proposals for the modification of the energy matrix with an impact on indoor air quality, with the regulatory entity of drinking water and sanitation services and the Honduran Ministry of Health. The water quality monitoring program was implemented at the municipal level with an online information system. As of May 2022, Mr. Ortiz is a regional water and sanitation advisor for the regional program in Washington, D.C., and is based currently in Lima, Peru. Dear Eduardo, thank you very much for accepting the invitation. The space is yours. Thank you. Good morning. I thank for the invitation of the Andean Health Organization. Please let me know if you can see the screen. Yes, go ahead. Well, doing some archaeology, the previous speaker already mentioned the Inter-American Water Day is an initiative that started in November of 1992 in the Inter-American Association of Sanitary Environmental Engineer meeting that was co-sponsored by the Caribbean Water and Wastewater Association, together with the AIDIS Congress and PAHO. This year, in 2022, we celebrated the 30th anniversary and was commemorated with the realization of the webinar with AIDIS and other partners with regards to the SDGs. And you will show some positive experiences in these 30 years as institutional topics, like in Porto Alegre, Brazil, where we have an education process for the education that goes hand by hand with the scope of the Inter-American Water Day to draw attention to problems related to drinking water, raise public awareness of the importance of water, which is essential to improve the conservation, preservation, and protection, promote water pollution control, and to encourage all governments and non-government international organizations, the civil society in general, to participate in improving the quality of water and sanitation. This year, we've also developed an instrument, TRACFIN. We have applied in several countries in Latin America. The financing is sometimes seen as inadequate depending on the situation of each country. The available of resources is always limited. The monitoring is important, and for that we develop an effort with the TRACFIN initiative that at some point we publish and we would like to share today. This methodology that provides follow-up to use a uniform classification and monitor the financial aspects that makes it possible to compare different countries of the region using tables and indicators. This process has a methodology that's called TRACFIN that we developed together with WHO. There's a tool for in terms of water sanitation, and there's a output, and this is try to generate policies and generate initiatives, make the necessary changes to do the changes in countries in terms of water sanitation and its financing. The challenge is this to become institutionalized, and year after year we do an exercise to monitor the accounts. What are we looking for? What did we find? We generate some indicators that we're going to see later, comparing with the GDP, which is one of the classics in terms of economics. And we generate these expenses. Where are we spending in terms of water or sanitation? Who pays for services? How much do they pay? And who are the main service providers? How much do they spend? This is generated through a number of 10 indicators. Perhaps the most known that we have are the total national per capita expenditure without differentiate by a specific service provider or a special department, but the total country spending, total expenditure of this sector expenditure per capita, the total country spending as a percentage of GDP, sanitation spending as a percentage of total spending, the spending in the urban sector as a percentage of the total national spending, the public expenditure, the user spending, and the national public transfers as a percentage of spending of water and sanitation, the international public transfers as a percentage of total spending of water and sanitation, and the total maintenance and operating costs as a percentage of total expenses. This gives us a vision of the methodology of the expenditure, the inputs, the maintenance cost, the inputs by public transfers, international transfer rates, and what that generates a gap, and how that gap is being financed either by loans, actions, or other financial mechanism that's present in the country. This has a methodology that is not my intention to go into detail. I'm more interested in terms of outcomes that define the expenses. The methodology has special indicators that are coded and collects the information both for the financial unit, the types of financing, the service providers, the services, the costs, and the service areas and uses. This gives us an overview of the effort and development in that country. We have applied this in 11 countries in Central and South America, and also the Caribbean and Mexico, and we are extending it for other countries in South America, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil. Once we finish this exercise, we will be showing the output. Here's what this is what is interesting, the outcomes. It was mentioned that around 1.8% there was needed to reach the SDG in coming years. But we see that we are hardly getting to 1% as an average. The most critical areas were 0.6%, and the most optimistic in 1.1, such as El Salvador. Another finding that was surprising is that the spending in the urban sector as a percentage of total national spending are majority, almost 78% is in expenditure, and it go as high as 92%, where this is total national spending. So this tells us that most of the expenditure is being done at the urban or urban marginal, and the big orphan will be the rural area, which is not getting the adequate financing in order to reach these goals. If we see as per capita expenditure, despite these are large volumes, such as Argentina, Peru, and Mexico, if we do it by population, there's a asymmetry where Panama is doing the largest investment in water and sanitation, despite that Mexico, Peru, and Argentina had a large volume of money. The per capita expenditure is much smaller, and that gives us a heterogeneity in terms of investment. And of course, countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala are still with a large gap. If we consider that health investments are approximately $200 to $250 per habitant, in this case, we see a large gap for water and sanitation. This gives us some heterogeneous results, how the level of financing of water and sanitation compared with similar countries in terms of income is quite different. The high heterogeneity in the total expenditure in the sector as a percentage of GDP is around 1%. It varies between 15 to 45% of total expenditure of sanitation. The average of 11 countries is 24.9%. This gives us an indicator of how the heterogeneity of investment. Most of the countries, the expenditure is large in the urban area compared to the rural sector. The 11 countries as average 75% of investments in urban compared to 25% in rural areas, which is quite low. These are countries that have higher rural component. There are countries with the total expenditure barely represent less than 2% of the total public expenditure. This gives us a very serious indicator of the investment costs that are insufficient to close this gap for coverage. Here we see the gaps in the sector, and the cost of operation and maintenance do not guarantee a good infrastructure and a good quality of service provider. There's an overcost in infrastructure with obsolete technologies. This graph perhaps is the most eloquent, where we see in the red portion the financing gap. We have countries with large gaps, almost 35% of the expenditure that has no financing, which will affect the sustainability of sources in the near medium future, with a 30% average in the region, which gives us the vision that despite this out of the pocket, there's still major gaps to be covered, and there's no clear vision of the finance. And perhaps Costa Rica, together with El Salvador and Guatemala, that have the lowest gaps. But that doesn't mean that that's good news, because there is a growing deficit. Well, from the quick analysis of the 10 indicators of the 11 countries, they indicate that there's a low incidence in the sector in relation to GDP, with a limited 1.0%. There was also bias in the direction of water and sanitation spending in, in urban areas in relation to sanitation services in rural areas. The financial structure of services show various financial models, a relative size sustainable model based on tariff collection such as Costa Rica, Argentina, and El Salvador, although the latter has a significant financial gap. At water and sanitation sector model financed mainly by public spending such as Panama, Mexico, Peru, and to a lesser extent Guatemala, even though the latter has an important contribution from users and a regular financial gap. And we have the Dominican Republic and Peru are also found here. And a model with insufficient public expenditures, strictly financed by users, external donations, and high weight of external reimbursable financing, such as Nicaragua and Honduras, which gives us a situation that's quite complex and makes us coincide with our colleague from ECLAC, where you see the SDG 6 as a positive progress, but quite slow. And part of this slow pace in reaching the SDGs as we would like in 2030 is associated to the terms of current financing that's still conditioned. So thank you very much. Thank you, dear Eduardo. Excellent presentation. He indicated the importance that this Inter-American Water Day has. You mentioned the instrument for finance analysis. This instrument is called TRAFFIC. Thank you. And showed us 10 indicators for outcomes or outputs with a detailed analysis of those indicators because they show the major inequalities, for example, in the investment between health sector and rural and urban, the gaps in finances, and with no doubt, as he mentioned at the end of his presentation, these financing gaps have an incidence that the progress and goals of SDGs are still slow. Once again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. We ask you to please remain in the room. We have many comments and questions have arrived. After the presentation, we will have a dialogue to respond all these comments and questions. Now we welcome Dr. Alberto Lora. He's an economist and public administrator with a master's degree in economics with extensive experience and solid knowledge in international trade, agriculture, trade policy, and technical cooperation. He's an expert in negotiations, particularly the free trade agreements with Canada, the European Free Trade Association, and the European Union, as well as in investment, export, and tourist promotion. He's currently an advisor to the Office of the Secretary General of the Andean Community of Nations. It is worth mentioning that last week he coordinated an excellent forum called Andean Regional Water Forum 2022. Dear Alberto, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. Go ahead, the space is yours. Good morning to everyone. Those who join us, thank you, Berta Luz. Special greetings to Dr. Maria del Carmen Calle and for Marina, who was kind enough to visit Lima last week in an event with regards to the Andean Regional Water Forum, and my greetings to Eduardo Ortiz Rampajo. Well, I'm going to share from the Andean community what we are working and taking again with regards to water. This is a consolidating topic for the Andean policies. It's a topic where the countries have been working, and I will share the presentation. Can you see it? Yes, go ahead. And I'm going to talk about this integrated water resource management in the Andean community, a priority in the region. First, to tell you who we are. This Andean community has 43 years of integration. It was established on May 26 of 1969, where the Cartagena Agreement was signed, that is the constitutive treaty of the Andean Pact, and today is known as the Andean Community. The goals are to promote the development of the Andean citizens, promote growth and employment, contribute to improve the CAN's position in the international economic context, to facilitate the participation of the 4 countries in the regional integration process. All this with the goal of reaching a common market at the regional level. Some data from the Andean community: 4 countries: Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. We have 5 associated countries from Mercosur and Chile, 3 observer countries, Spain, Morocco, and recently we have Turkey. 4 million of square kilometers of territory with 12.5% growth and a growth of 32% in recent year to $8,667 million, and with exports with a growth of 42.1%. In 2021, world exports for a value of $136,444 million. Bolivia represents 10.4% of the population, Colombia 44.9%, Ecuador 15.6%, and Peru 29%. The Andean community is made up by these 4 countries and is integrated in an Andean system of integration with intergovernment institutions, community institutions, participation levels of civil society. The highest instance for decision is the Presidential Andean Council, made up by the presidents who recently met this last August 29th, and they issue guidelines and declarations that are made public. We also have the Foreign Relations Commission, which are the decision entities. The foreign relations ministries and international trade ministers issue documents that need to be complied by the member countries. This is to show you this obligation of these Andean decisions that are supranational, that are added once they are issued and they are published in the official Cartagena Agreement newsletter. And other additional institutions, we have the Andean Parliament, the Justice Court, the Secretary General for Administration for the integration system. The Andean Health Organization is also part of the system. The Simon Rodriguez Agreement on Education, the Latin America Development Bank, the CAF, and the Latin American Reserve Fund. We also have the Simon Bolivar Andean University, and we have the councils with civil society. This is the Entrepreneur Consultative Council, Labor Council, Indigenous People Council, and municipality authorities. This makes up the integration Andean system. This is a large team. In the environmental issue, this is something that in the Cartagena Agreement is contained in 2 articles, mostly. Article 3, where it talks about in order to achieve the objectives of this agreement, the following mechanisms and measures, among others, shall be employed. Among them, we have the actions for the use and conservation of natural resources and the environment. And Article 128 mentions that the member countries will undertake joint actions that would allow a better use of the renewable and non-renewable natural resources and the conservation and improvement of the environment. Inside this institutionality and mandate of the Cartagena Agreement, we have issued decisions and declarations on the environmental issues in the Andean community that I will briefly mention. A decision on common regime on access to genetic resources issued in 1996 to protect what has to do with these topics of resource access that the Andean community has in abundance and should be adequately protected. Decision 435 that creates the Andean Committee on Environmental Authorities, which is the instrument by which we negotiate and decide the proposals that need to be taken to higher instances. And this has been instituted in 1998, specifically to deal with these topics. Decision 523 on the regional biodiversity strategy for the countries of the Andean tropics. This is a very important topic in the Andean community of the countries that make up this community, where biodiversity, as you know, represents one of the most important worldwide. Decision 591 for disease prevention and this attention or care. And this is one of the topics that have been worked on the regional basis with effort and success by the Andean countries with important outcomes. Decision 596, establishment of the Council of Ministers of the Environment and Sustainable Development of the Andean Community in 2004. So there is an institutionality, not only a technical Andean Committee of Sanitary Authorities, but also a Council of Ministers of the Environment with decision-making around these topics for formulating proposals that need to be approved by the Foreign Ministers Andean Council, as I mentioned before. We have the Andean strategy for comprehensive and sustainable alternative development. This is decision 614, decision 699, development of environmental indicators in the Andean community, where we are recently working with the development of an Andean environmental platform that seeks to generate information of what's happening at the Andean level in environmental topics. And this platform will hopefully be working on at the beginning of next year. Decision 763, the Andean Strategy of Integrated Water Resources Management. So we do have a strategy for water resource management that was approved in 2011 that requires a review, but has the basic principles that I will mention next that are required to deal with this topic at the Andean level. In 2011, when this Andean strategy was approved, this was moved toward the environmental topic in a decisive way, but later on, the situation got complicated with Venezuela exiting the Andean community, and we fell in a stage of limitation of the activities in terms of integration, and this strategy stayed there suspended. But we are now revisiting this topic. What are the areas where we need to work to reactivate this Andean strategy for water resources? What are the elements that we have in this Andean strategy? Is knowledge management is number one, where we pull the actions related with the consolidation of the information system of water resources in the sub-region, and those who develop strategic programs for research, training, formal education, and non-formal education. Number two is governance, that seeks to pull actions to develop stakeholders' capacity of the member states who are in this integrated water resource management by strengthening institutionality associated to this management. Third topic is cooperation, international and sub-regional levels. This is cooperation between member countries and the management of international cooperation to support the implementation of this Andean strategy of water resources. Number four is to promote conservation and sustainable use of water resources. And here we are looking for criteria and guidelines and proposals to use in a sustainable way what we have as water resources. Number five, to respond to the effect of climate change on water resources, actions to improve knowledge on the potential effects of climate change on water resources, and to promote the adequate measures to mitigate these impacts. Number six is the transboundary watersheds to promote the strategy of IWRM with international instruments that countries that share this sub-regional level. And finally, to promote guidelines and actions for the integrated water resource management in the Amazon basin countries. This strategy was approved in 2011. So more than 10 years have passed. In 2014, through Decision 797, these committees and ad hoc groups in the Andean community regrouped within the framework of re-engineering of the Andean integration system, and we reduced the scope of action of the Andean community. The integration process to 27 committees in groups in total that prioritize activities due to Venezuela's exit and the prioritization that at that moment was considered adequate to dedicate more time to commercial topics. In that prioritization doesn't incorporate the Andean Committee on Environmental Authority, and there was a suspension of the analysis development, not only of the comprehensive or integrated water resource management, but that was translated to the national scope. Countries started working not in an integrated way, but each one on its own with their public policies around the water resources. With regards to the environment, the Andean Ad Hoc Committee of Illegal Mining stayed active, the CAMI, a strong institution because of this problem of illegal mining, which is having a strong impact in the Andean activities. And the Andean Committee on Disaster Prevention that I mentioned, that's still actively working. Since 2014, we have created several committees in CAN, reaching 43 at present, which anticipates that in the future, we can propose actions to reactivate this Andean Committee of Environmental Authorities. Now, the Andean Environmental Charter collected the Andean Strategy of Integrated Water Resources Management, approved in December of 2020, from the work of the ad hoc group to draft this Andean Environmental Charter. Was the first element, the integrated water resources management. Number two, the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and ecosystem services. This disaster prevention and response, including forest fires, the fight against illegal mining, once again is insisting, the strengthening of circular economy in the Andean countries, and the environmental management of chemicals and wastes. So this environmental charter, although it's a declaration of ministers of foreign relations, with the goal that all of this will be discussed in with the proposal of new actions around the 6 axes of the environmental and the environmental charter. This is what we are doing precisely with this integrated management of water resources, and to carry out a first Water Andean Regional Forum that was carried out the previous week. You had the opportunity to participate. The objective was to know the evolution of this integrated water management in Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru in the last 10 years and its perspective in the context of climate crisis. And we produced guidelines to advance in the implementation of this first thematic axis of water resources. In this regional forum, we had the participation of government, the academia, territorials, and several actors, so we can have a general scope of the situation of the hydric resources in the Andean community. And we have the support of ECLAC in this review made at the regional level. This Andean Regional Water Forum, I will briefly comment some of the outputs and ideas that came out from this dialogue. We had the first that there were important advances were shared in Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru in water resources management in multiple aspects, taking into account that water is a source of life and is it at the center of development, climate, economy, and health. It was agreed that water competencies need to be consolidated through the evolution of practices that allow the formulation of public policies and institutional strengthening that connect both public and private stakeholders. We spoke about these institutional strengthening and governance. We highlighted the need to deepen strategic and operational planning, for which this is vital not only for aligning the national plans of the member countries with the territorial plans, but also to promote sustainable financing strategies consistent with water needs and their respective ecological transitions. It was also noted that we face common challenges in the regional level and with a view in achieving the SDGs for the 2030 agenda, hence the importance of advances in the exchange of experiences and information, acting with multi-sectorial governance schemes with a focus on infrastructure, biodiversity, gender, and interculturality, already mentioned in this event. The commitment was reaffirmed to seek ways to guarantee the human right to water for 115 million Andean citizens, together with equitable, sustainable, and affordable access for the development of various activities. And finally, it was considered essential to work in programs focused on the eradication of pollution and over-exploitation of water resources in the Andean territory. And the forum generated active discussions to promote water supply and demand based on innovation, security, and inclusion. This is basically what I wanted to cover in today and share with you. I think that we're celebrating 30 years of this International Inter-American Water Day, International Water Day, where we can share experiences at different institutions. So thank you. Thank you very much. Very kind. And this is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you, dear Alberto. Excellent presentation. You showed us a very interesting about the origin of the Andean community in 1969 and the commitment of promoting the integration from the since the start considering the environment and recently the Andean Environmental Charter that has several interesting elements of preservation, prevention, disaster, fight against illegal mining, circular economy, environmental management. And you also mentioned how at this moment, everything that has to do with the water management and the importance the event carried out last week in the Andean Forum on Water. There are many challenges and the interesting work you've done. We have many questions and comments, so we ask you to please stay in the room. We thank all the people connected from the Ministry of Health, academia, social organizations from Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Venezuela, Argentina, Cuba, Guatemala, Honduras, México, Panamá, Paraguay, República Dominicana, El Salvador, United States, Spain, many others. We have many greetings and we thank to each one of them. Now we will move to the Q&A. All of are very interesting. We have systematized them and I will read the questions to each one of you so you can have time to prepare your response. For Marina, they ask, what is the role and responsibilities that the private sector must comply to accelerate the progress towards the achievement of those goals? And also in relations who are listening to us, what recommendations could you make to people who at this moment are participated in this seminar? How do we include ancestral knowledge in the pillar of innovation? We in the Andean Health Organization, in the United Nations Frame Convention, in the past year, we emphasized social innovation and the importance of valuing and recognizing and incorporating the ancestral knowledge in public policies from our originally peoples that are so interesting and coherent in harmony with nature. And they also ask for a question for Marina, how to promote and facilitate the original people's participation in designing projects for projects of innovation in water management. For Eduardo, we have systematized two questions. What strategies are recommended to increase the adequate financing in rural areas? And commented you that in the Andean Health Organization, we have an intersectorial Andean roundtable of fight against health inequalities, and is made up with delegates from the ministries of the 6 Andean countries, with also ECLAC and other organizations such as the Statistic National Institutes, the consultation, the roundtable fight against poverty, in view of a multi-sectorial approach to inequality. So the question is, what indicator or indicator would you recommend to include, since this roundtable has a mandate from the Ministry of Health to generate a monitoring system for inequality reductions? In the conferences, they show the large inequalities that are present that have to do with financing and the guarantee to the right of water. If you could recommend an indicator of the link between water, health, and inequality reduction. For Alberto, we have, are you considering in this reactivation process in the water resources to strengthen the link between the importance of water resources and reaching the SDGs of health and with social health determinants of health, what will be the importance for the Andean community, the linking characteristic of the decisions of the Andean community. Could you please highlight what are the achievements and challenges in this regard? Well, with this group of questions, they're all quite interesting. We have a very active Facebook and YouTube chat. You have the word. Thank you so much. Thank you, Berta. I will start because I got the questions first. Well, to respond to the first question, what is the role of the private sector to accelerate SDG 6? Well, in first place, indicate you that United Nations has acknowledged the importance of the private sector, not only for SDG 6, but the other SDGs. And this is one of the efforts that's been strengthening in recent years of making the right links between the public and the private sector. In the specific case of SDG 6 and our region, we were making an analysis of management models and what were the conditions that needed to be complied to increase and promote private investment and their participation, and will focus on drinking water and sanitation. And we saw that in the urban areas with high income and mid incomes, there is a clear opportunity for private investment if you establish rates that would allow to recover costs and be profitable and, for example, other actions like wastewater management. So they want the optimal conditions for investment will be in high income and low in mid income areas, but we still need some regulatory frame and have an adequate infrastructure with information available for decision making, and that public opinion is favorable. This is a key aspect for drinking water in the region. But we saw that in the low income urban areas, the private investment is difficult because a lot of transaction costs and there's a high risk of not being to have rates that will make them recover their investments. So in those urban areas that are low income, they need state subsidies and support to the private sector that can contribute improving the coverage of drinking water and sanitation in these areas. And finally, in rural areas where there's no coverage, we saw that the public investment is instrumental to promote this, that promotes the participation of the private sector. This is on one hand, the first question. The second question that has to do with the indigenous people and the role of ancestral knowledge. From ECLAC, we acknowledge that this is key for the development of public policies and local projects. We, with the role in ECLAC, that we have political discussions, technical assistance to governments, and training to government officials. What we have tried to incorporate is that in the regional dialogues of the coming year, for example, we have included the indigenous people as one of the key stakeholders. In concrete, we have a session called Solutions Brainstorming, where we want to review innovative lines and that will give solutions to sustainable water management. And there the dialogues for the coming year. We have Ms. Akiti Kidwa. She's an environmentalist from the Colombia that belongs to the Arauco peoples. This is a concrete action of the CLAC. And we've made some studies on nature-based decisions with a link between water, energy, and nutrition that include ancestral knowledge of the indigenous people. So here we believe that that's one of the innovation where we can include their knowledge. That's my answer. Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, in relation, what recommend to increase finance in rural areas? Well, there's several. People usually think that in loans with different entities, banks, etc. But I'm gonna make an analogy of a person who's going to ask for a loan. The bank is going to look at him or her, see the credit, their payment capacity, and give them a cap. More from this, we cannot give you. The same happened with a country. And what you're going to get as a loan is not going to be bigger than your wallet. So the best strategy is that countries will to provide the funds and necessary resources to invest in water and sanitation. And that goes through positioning this topic with relevant information for decision making and go to these discussions of budget and fiscal and tax policy that is the one who is going to finance and to take important elements, as my colleague from the CLAC mentioned, which is the cross subsidies to populations who are vulnerable populations, because we cannot lose the human vision in this type of things that are needed and need to be supported and increased. I will go by increasing the country's investment, where you can add loans or credits on that, but the country's itself investment with a clear and logic policy in terms of cross subsidies. What health indicators can be added is asked from Horace Conju in the intersectorial table for inequalities in water and sanitation. Well, first place, we need to identify what are these vulnerable populations. Nobody can neglect. I've been working 6 years in Ecuador, and I learned about the Andean dynamic and the urban, marginal, and rural populations, especially the ancestral peoples, are the ones who are left behind the water and sanitation. We have indicators of mortality, mother mortality, child mortality, indicators of child development because they condition nutrition and development, and other indicators such as quality that could be studied through surveys or information that my country may have. It's important to identify what are those vulnerable groups and those groups that are being left behind for development, so we can add them and incorporate them to a better quality of life. Thank you. We continue? Well, with regards to a couple of questions, thank you so much to the attendees. Well, the first one has to do in the process of reactivation of CAN with strengthening the link between water resource management with health determinants. And for that, I would like to recall what Marina presented that talks that 7 out of 10 people with no access to safely managed sanitation. The fact that 2.5 out of 10 people have no access to drinking water in a safe manner in Latin America, and that 23.8 million people in the rural areas have no access to sanitation facility for hand washing. So there we establish a direct relationship, because people that don't have that access to drinking water has an immediate impact on health. And of course, this is something that we need to analyze and evaluate and take action so the populations involved, the rural, even in large cities where there's a large number of people who participate in urban processes, this generates an impact upon health that it costs all of us, the state, people's life, children that don't have that access to water, drinking water, and they come down with diseases that can have a high mortality. So I think that yes, indeed, this is a very important topic that needs to work. We need to work, and also waste, the treatment of wastewater. 42% of the waters are treated, but there are large differences among the countries. So that treatment is also concentrated in urban areas, and there's no adequate infrastructure. We're facing this climate change. So these things generate impact on health. And of course, there is a need that the strategy for water resources consider this aspect. And I'm sure that the Andean community has it. Now, the second question about the importance of these Andean decisions linking characteristics. They ask us for an example. A very simple example is a roaming example. If you see, this roaming measure was approved at the Andean level, and we eliminate the roaming charges for 115 million inhabitants in the Andean region. So if a Peruvian goes to Bolivia and makes an international phone call to any country of the Andean community, there's no roaming cost, when previously that cost was large. So that the Andean decision for the 4 Andean countries allows that this has an incredible force, and it's included in a regional regulation for each country. So this facilitates the consultation to make progress, because you don't have to go through the Congress of the 4 countries. So that standard is incorporated. I could show you many, for example, with trade, the possibility you as Andean citizens to mobilize with your ID with no problem. So in terms of water resources, what is approved at the Andean level is binding, and therefore the importance of working at the regional level. That would be my answer. Thank you. Thank you very much for your reply to the questions. We have other questions, but we consider that we're going to take this opportunity to ask you to leave us a final message, a core idea that you would like to highlight. And while you think in that idea and that recommendation, we would like to propose to all 2 participants an active pause. We're going to take this learning and knowledge exchange. It is essential to take some time to relax and start a mini session of physical exercise. The Andean Health Organization encourages the well-being of those who accompany us. And in this virtual session, we will have this active pause to stay healthy, combat stress, reduce work fatigue, and keep muscles flexible and healthy. Please stand up and let's start with this active pause. There will be no interpretation during this active pause.
Buenos días, buenas tardes. Desde el Organismo Andino de Salud, Convenio Hipólito Unanue, estamos muy felices de invitarte a esta actividad saludable. Para esta actividad necesitas un cuaderno, una agenda que puedas apretar y vamos hoy a fortalecer el tren superior, es decir, los brazos, los antebrazos, las manos. Así que quiero que tomes un libro, una agenda con firmeza y vamos a arrancar calentando, haciendo movimientos circulares hacia el frente. Muy bien. Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Perú y Venezuela, hoy trabajando juntos desde el Orascón para hacer esta actividad saludable. Ahora remitos, perfecto, a un lado, al otro, y vamos hoy a aprender 3 ejercicios fundamentales para fortalecer nuestros brazos, nuestros hombros. Vamos remando, caliénteme bien esos hombros, esos brazos. 10, 9, 8, 7, si se puede, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 y descansas. Muy bien, perfecto. Primer ejercicio. Quiero que aprietes tu libro, tu agenda con ambas manos con firmeza y lo acerques al pecho. Vamos a imaginar que vamos a romper el libro por la mitad. Entonces a la cuenta de 3 vamos a hacer fuerza hacia afuera con las 2 manos, como si fuésemos a romper el libro en 2 pedazos. Agarro a la 1, a las 2, a las 3, fuerza hacia afuera, que tiemble, fuerza hacia afuera, si se puede. Vamos a sostener la fuerza 10 segunditos, vamos. Energía, 10, 9, no se rinda, 8, 7, 6, se siente, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, descansas. Muy bien. ¿Viste? ¿Has sentido esa fuerza en la parte de los brazos? ¿Sí o no? Bueno, seguimos. Aprietas el libro, la agenda y vamos a hacer el mismo ejercicio, pero ahora con el libro no pegado al pecho, sino al frente. ¿Listo? Aprieto. A la 1, a las 2, a las 3, fuerza hacia afuera, fuerza, si se puede. Vamos, 10, 9, 8, 7, si se puede, vamos, 5, 4, que tiemble, 3, 2, 1 y descanso, vamos, suelto. Miren que este es un gimnasio portátil, desde la oficina, desde la casa, donde quiera que te encuentres. Muy bien. Tercer ejercicio, vamos a tomar nuestro libro, nuestra agenda, aprieto cerca al pecho, voy a estirar un brazo, estiro un brazo. Yo voy a imaginar que esto es como un arco y flecha. Entonces aprieto y voy a hacer fuerza con este brazo y con el otro voy a sostener. Agarras a la 1, a las 2, a las 3, fuerza. Hale el libro, hálelo, si se puede. Vamos, 10, 9, 8, si se puede, que tiemble. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 y descansa. Fortalecimiento del hombro. Es hora de cambiar, así que toma tu libro, tu agenda, vamos para el otro lado, aprieto con los dedos, muy bien, a la 1, a las 2, a las 3, fuerza, que se estiren esos brazos, que se fortalezcan, los quiero fuertes, invencibles, enérgicos, vamos, 5, 4, que tiemble, 3, 2, 1 y regresas al centro y sueltas. Muy bien, perfecto. Alcanzamos a hacer un ejercicio más. Quiero que cojas tu libro, lo aprietes, muy bien, lo vas a poner encima de tu cabeza. Puedes estirar los brazos o semiflexionarlos. Apriete la cuenta de 3, fuerza, separa el libro, ¿listo? A la 1, a las 2, a las 3, fuerza. Separa el libro, si se puede, vamos. Fortalecimiento de los hombros, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 y sueltas y descansas. Muy bien, perfecto. Finalmente vamos a hacer 2 estiramientos para soltar esa tensión de los hombros, de los brazos. Muy bien. Quiero que tomes tu libro, tu agenda, lo envuelves como si fuera una bufanda, un collar alrededor de tu cuello y con el otro brazo haces un poquito de fuerza. Practica estos ejercicios, puedes hacer 2, 3 series en el transcurso de tu día. Tu pausa activa y vas a mantener tus brazos fuertes, enérgicos, saludables. Desde el Organismo Andino de Salud, siempre promoviendo actividades que favorezcan nuestra salud integral, física, emocional, mental y mental. Cambia, perfecto, envuelves, tomas el codo y regresas. Muy bien. Bueno, quedamos fatigados, se sintió, parece fácil, pero tú que estás allá conmigo, se sintió bastante. Entonces, una manera de hacer actividad física fácil desde donde te encuentres. Así que Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Perú y Venezuela a fortalecer esos brazos hoy a través del organismo andino de salud. Muchísimas gracias por venir a esta actividad saludable. Sigan muy juiciosos desde el organismo andino de salud trayendo actividad física y pausas activas para todos. Chao, chao.
Muy bien por esta pausa activa.
Okay, we finished this active pause. We hope that everyone has enjoyed this relaxation moment. We would like to thank for the answers they provided. And please, to close this cycle of Q&A, please leave us a final message in the order of the presentations. Go ahead. Thank you, Berta. I think that the final message that we would like to convey from ECLAC is that it's important to visualize the SDG 6 to invest in strengthening over the fulfillment of that SDG 6 and that benefits not only in the environment, but also in the economy. So in that regard, remind you the 4 pillars of water transition, sustainable, inclusive, that we are strongly promoting from ECLAC. Number 1, to guarantee the human right to water and sanitation that are safe through promoting investment. Number 2, achieve the equitative and access to finish with water poverty, avoid the negativity, and to promote a circular management that, as I mentioned, has benefits not only in the economy, but also in the environment. That would be my message. Thank you. Excellent. Go ahead, Eduardo. Well, if we see it in retrospective, in the past 40 years, where major efforts were done in water and sanitation in Latin America, there's been major progress, but because we are the continent of inequality, we also have inequalities in water and sanitation. I think it is something that we need to consider, recovering those vulnerable groups like the rural areas and marginal urban areas, those large spaces where the average makes us lose visibility. The averages hide the inequalities that we have in this region, and to make the effort, we are a continent of mid-level investments, but there's a will to work on the development of the population by investing in health and water and sanitation. And as the Andean organization, there are many opportunities to be done with populations at the border levels and populations who share many of these inequalities. Thank you. Well, from the Andean Community Secretariat, a final message. Indeed, the Andean community has a important water enrichment that can be a powerful factor for development and social well-being if it's handled adequately and sustainable. That is why, and as a priority, to coordinate efforts at the national and regional level and international with other regions to work in this integrated management of water resources, to see and understand water as an integration factor or element, to explore possibilities of support and strengthening those capacities of the stakeholders in this management of water resources. That is the message. I believe there's a lot to be done. This is a fundamental element for life, for health, for everyone, for all the 150 inhabitants, but also each one of us have to be responsible with the use we do to this fundamental resource. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very interesting ideas. We would like to thank you for your excellent presentations. We have received many congratulations because of the topic that you have discussed. Thank you, Marina, Eduardo, and Alberto, and to all of you who have participated, the Andean Health Organization team, and to all of those who participate in this activity that's been possible thanks to the commitment to the Andean and Latin America integration. I give the floor to Dr. María Carmen Calle to close this webinar on behalf of the Andean Health Organization Poly-to-NANUE Agreement. Go ahead, dear Dr. Calle. Thank you, Bertita. Well, my first words are to thank Marina, Eduardo, and Alberto for being with us and sharing so important information, and to tell us in few words that we made some progress in this topic, but we still need to do more, much more. As a health referral institution in the Andean region, for us, water is not just to provide health services. Health also adds the water and sanitation issue. And we are very well aware that when we talk about more cost-effective preventive actions, having safe water is still one of the most important. The numbers that you've showed us are averages, because you've showed how Latin America is doing, how the 10 countries are doing with their indicators, and both in water and sanitation. And definitely we cannot leave. We have to mention that we are the most, the region of the world that has more inequality. So when we talk about water access, we know that there are regions or rural areas that don't reach even to 20 or 25%. When we have reviewed the water topic, the indicators are somewhat misleading because they talk about water, but then talk about water on the 24 hours. There are a series of ways of measuring, and if we don't have those alert eyes, very wide open eyes to realize what those numbers are hiding or those indicators are hiding, we consider that it is very important to use more refined indicators in the evaluation of this round table that we have, this intersectorial table, because the intersectorial table for the fight against inequalities in the Andean region, but we need to have indicators that make this SDG 6 is visualized, is seen. Now, when you look at the SDGs, you know that this is the social contract. We have committed as countries, and these indicators are interdependent. None of them is apart from the other. I'm a Rotary member, and one of our areas is water, and other areas are mother and child, health, education, disease prevention. And in a recent meeting that we had in Houston, water had to be included in all of these areas. It can't go separately ways. It has to do with education, health, has to do with local development. The Andean Health Organization has a main goal to contribute to the health and well-being of the more than 168 million persons that make up our 6 countries. This is very clear to us, but we also have it clear that this is an intersectorial bet. Although we work with the Ministry of Health, we know very well that we need to work with all the ministries, and we also know that we need to work in partnerships. And our first partnership is the CAN. We're, we're both part of the Integration Andean system, and I think it was important to mention the Andean Forum last October, where it was shown that countries face common threats and challenges in terms of complying with SDGs for 2030, and therefore the importance to exchange experiences and information. But they also indicated the commitment to find ways to guarantee the human right to water to 115 citizens, because together with an sustainable, equitative, and accessible access to carry out the different activities. In other words, we just celebrated a forum in the Andean region. On the other hand, there's also been an evaluation from the CECLAC, and they've been very clear that there needs to be a global acceleration of the SDG 6 and the sustainable water transition that has to be inclusive in Latin America and the Caribbean. We should not forget the 5 areas and the information, the data, capacity building, financing, innovation. We always say that with no budget, there's no rights. And with no financing, we cannot work, bet that nobody is left behind. So everyone has water and sanitation. And also what Eduardo mentioned has been extremely important, where we need to have clear indicators that would allow us to say where we are from the perspective of investment in water and sanitation, and we realize that we're not doing well. So I would just like to thank you again for what you have shared. These webinars don't stay here. From here, we go to technical meetings, perhaps with you and the areas of our ministry, because we consider that we provide information to webinar to many people. At this moment, we have more than 300 people listening to us, but perhaps we will need to discuss at a more technical and more decision-making level. Thank you so much, Eduardo, Marina, and Alberto. And thank you so much to all the group from the Andean Health Organization. At this moment, I would like to make a special mention to Berta Luz. She's one of the most outstanding technical officials. I would also like to invite you to our coming webinars. Next Thursday, we will have 2 webinars. In the morning, we have webinar 149 at 11 a.m. Human health, one single health, environment, animal, and human. And in the afternoon, we only have Dr. Jarbas Barbosa, the elected director of PAHO. He was not able to join us this afternoon, but next Thursday, we will have him at 5 p.m. with the Pan American Health Organization plans and priorities. He's going to tell us what are the plans and priorities for the coming 5 years. Thank you very much. Once again, special thanks to the speakers, participants, and a special thanks to all the group of the Andean Health Organization that makes possible that we are here in webinar number 148. Thank you very much. See you soon.